In this episode of Simply Offensive, I'm joined by Tim Shipp, a startup founder and veteran cybersecurity professional of over 25 years. Tim has worked both on the blue team side and the red team side. Tim also shares some knowledge on getting started in cybersecurity, as well as how defenders can learn from offensive security to protect their environments. Do zero-day exploits and supply chain attacks keep you up at night? Worry no more. You can harden your security with ThreatLocker. Imagine taking a proactive, deny by default approach to cybersecurity, blocking every action, process, and user unless specifically authorized by your team. ThreatLocker helps you do this and provide a full audit of every action allowed and blocked for risk management and compliance. Onboarding and operations are fully supported by their US-based support team. Stop the exploitation of trusted applications within your organization to keep you running efficiently and secure, protected from ransomware. Worldwide companies like JetBlue trust ThreatLocker to secure their data and keep their business operations flying high. To learn more about how ThreatLocker can mitigate unknown risks and ensure compliance for your organization, visit threatlocker.com/simply offensive. Hello and welcome to another episode of Simply Offensive. Today I'm joined by Tim Shipp. Tim and I got to meet at B-Side San Francisco this year. So I got to meet him and his business partner Lisa there. And since Tim has kind of an offensive security background, figured it would make sense to have him on. He's got experience on the blue team and red team side. We'll dig into his background and how that offensive knowledge is helpful for defenders. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Thanks, Phillip. Thanks for having me.
So how is your summer going?
Hot. So we've actually got common weather, we've actually really warm weather in the UK. So I'm one of the few people that has AC. So I'm actually enjoying it at the moment.
That's good that you got AC. It's unfortunate for locations that aren't used to that kind of weather. So it's good that you're prepared. There's a lot of that going on here in the US. Where I live in Texas, of course, US, we use Fahrenheit. So we're normally several days into the hundreds, which is still not cool weather here, but we've got places up north that are experiencing unseasonably hot weather for them that they're not used to. So it's always bad if you don't have air conditioning and have to deal with this kind of weather.
Yeah, absolutely.
We got Black Hat DEF CON coming up. So how's your preparation for that going?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty much got everything ready. Tickets booked, and we did it all well in advance. We got some favourable flights. Obviously, I'm flying from the UK. Lisa's flying from Tokyo. It's it's not just domestic flights for us. But I've not been since 2018, since pre-COVID. So really excited to be getting back out to Vegas, see what's changed, meet some old friends and some old faces, and just get back into the community. Really.
Yeah, really good place for a startup to be. Lots of networking and connections to be made there.
Absolutely.
So before we get started, if you wouldn't mind kind of introducing yourself and sharing your background.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Tim Shipp. I'm the CTO and one of the co-founders at Threatlight. I started my cybersecurity career about 25 years ago in Panasonic. That's how I found my way into cybersecurity, or it found me. And I had a good acumen for the red team side of things, and that got me into my first incident response job at Airbus. I went from Airbus to Thales to Symantec to Accenture, and when they got acquired, I then spent a couple of years at Cybereason before we founded our own company about just under 2 years ago.
Very cool. So Cybereason does a lot of stuff, I guess around threat intelligence. So do you have a background in threat intelligence?
I've done some work in threat intelligence, with varying degrees of success. Intelligence can be a bit of a mixed bag. A lot of people are sort of regurgitating the same generic IOCs and same generic standards. Whereas there are some companies that are doing some really good sort of deep threat intelligence that's bespoke and to certain threat actors. A lot of what's out there, we saw a threat actor using Mimikatz and a DNS going back to AWS. Not really threat intelligence, but it's a mixed bag.
Yeah, kind of a fan of threat intelligence because I know it's kind of good for folks if they're doing red team exercises, if they're wanting to figure out what APT that they're going to emulate. And that just goes all back to one of the things, in my day jobs, I've been, I've have offensive security background, but still continue to be, an evangelist for offensive security, because I think a lot of cases that people underestimate the need for offensive security, or at least the concepts of that, because if you understand the threat actor's thinking, you're better able to defend against if you don't, because, you take someone that gets to go through some pen testing training course or something, that maybe they're a firewall administrator, and then all of a sudden they've been through that, things kind of click and they understand why this is dangerous. So having that mindset is very valuable. And one of the things that I really try to emphasize on the show is to get out the need for the offensive security mindset, to be able to think like the adversary, to be able to better protect against that.
Yeah, and understanding the adversary you're trying to replicate. If a customer's a defense customer, the TTPs and that threat actor is going to use are very different to an extent, than if it's a commercial customer who's going to be targeted by ransomware. And even if you're targeting a defense company, you may be emulating 2 or 3 different threat actors within that same campaign. So it's being able to direct it in a certain way and be specific in your TTPs is very helpful to the customer, especially if they've got a competent blue team on the other side that's trying to profile you and put you in a certain bucket. If you're all over the place, they can't do that.
So you've been in the industry quite a while. So could you kind of share your experience and just kind of your thoughts on the evolution of security? Because, back years ago, a lot of companies didn't have dedicated security teams. So you've seen a lot over the years. If you just wouldn't mind sharing kind of your experience and views of the way cybersecurity has evolved over the past 25 years.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, my first foray into cybersecurity was at Panasonic. I was doing IP telephony at the time. I was working for their PBX arm, and I'd been employed to do, primarily the Cisco side of things. But they were getting a lot of, the whole industry was getting a lot of issues with toll fraud, and people were taking over PBXs and using them to make premium rate calls around the world. And we started investigating why this happened. At the time, they had recently just IP was a new thing. What we saw with PBXs back 20, 25 years ago, we're kind of seeing with SCADA systems now, where effectively you've got a system that wasn't intended to be internet facing, had no IP interface, and suddenly you literally just stick an IP address on it and another module, and all of a sudden protocols that weren't supposed to be exposed to the world are exposed to the world, and bad things happen. So I looked at how their IP systems could be broken. I was able to break them reasonably easy. I then had to fly to Japan and have a very awkward conversation with some guys in Japan, explaining how I broke their PBX. That basically became my job. If they had a new product, I would effectively start pen testing it. Didn't know it was called pen testing at the time. I was just doing what I saw was the right thing to do as a IT professional. And then somebody said, you can get paid for this. And that's when that started happening for me. But that was back when it was, information assurance. You didn't have security teams. You didn't have cyber teams. Cyber wasn't really a word that was even being thrown about at the time. It was all confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And that was what everybody compared everything to. You didn't have threat groups like you had now. I remember when Mandiant became popular, and you had this sort of APT21, APT1, whatever they decided to call them in the end. And when things started to really take off in the early 2000s, and it's kind of been a kind of cat and mouse game since then, as things evolve and products come out and new ways to mitigate. But we're never going to be at the end of it. It's always an arms race.
It's really a good thing that the defensive side has kind of caught up, because it's interesting how back years ago it was so much easier to gain a foothold into systems, to hack into things. But it's also interesting too that we didn't have all the tools back then, because I remember, so I got started in security in 2004, but my first pen test job was in 2012. And I remember anytime you went into an organization, if they had a system that was vulnerable, a Windows system, then the MS 0867 was usually a pretty good option through Metasploit, and you would gain foothold every time. And now with the endpoint detection systems, it's getting a little more difficult to to actually be able to break in those systems as well as defend those systems.
Yeah, and it's good for us as sort of offensive practitioners, because MSO 867 Mimikat's profit isn't any fun for us. It doesn't build up our skill set. It's also no value for the customer. If we can come in, get a root on the domain controller day one, they get no value from that pen test or that red teaming engagement. So the fact that we do actually have to go and enumerate everything properly, we do have to write some bespoke exploit code. It keeps the job interesting for us. It gives the customer some real return on their value, on their spend for actually taking out those campaigns with us.
Yeah, it's really kind of interesting that how it's a lot more difficult to be able to gain those footholds now, because like some endpoint detection systems are getting a little more secure, and it gets a little bit harder as a pen tester to be able to gain a foothold in those environments, because before you didn't really have to worry about bypassing EDRs and endpoints and stuff. It wasn't that difficult back at one time. Really the only thing running that you had to worry about is antivirus.
Yeah, and it's kind of had resulted in a bit of a pivot, and it's I see it on the red team side of things. I also see it on the incident response side. Defending is, well, Windows is a bit hard now, so let's just bypass it entirely. So we see a lot more attackers going straight after Linux, maintaining presence on Linux, and just avoiding Windows entirely. Particularly customers who have ESXi or hypervisors, if they can get in via a web shell, stay in the Linux estate and just pivot to ESXi, particularly in ransomware, and just not touch Windows entirely, which becomes slightly problematic from a defender's perspective when all of your tools, or the vast majority of your tools, are geared towards defending your Windows estate. So I mean that's certainly what I've seen in the past 4 to 5 years. I think that's likely going to get worse as time goes on, because that's what's currently the soft underbelly.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, because and it's kind of interesting too. You've probably heard of the Akira ransomware gang, where there was some recent incident where they went after, all the endpoints on Windows systems, they couldn't gain a foothold. So I think they was either default credentials or weak credentials on a webcam. They were able to gain access to this webcam. From there, they did like an SMB share internally, and then gain access that way, and was able to spread their ransomware. And back in that same note where the Windows endpoints are getting more difficult, I was listening to a Black Hills Information Security podcast, probably back around during the pandemic or shortly after, and they were talking about how it's getting a lot more difficult. You have to come at your targets from spaces outside of the typical endpoint. So as you kind of mentioned, Linux and Mac and Unix are becoming more common, because one of the things I think people neglected, in my opinion, correct me if I'm wrong, people think that, of course, people have thought over the years and got comfortable with Linux and Unix are more secure operating systems. And in my opinion, I think it's more the threat actors are really not going after those, because Windows has been such an easy target. And then as far as back to the Linux environments, is people really not understanding how to secure those. And traditionally, there just hasn't been a lot of software out there to protect Linux endpoints.
Absolutely, and the need hasn't been there. And what we tend to find with especially sort of companies that have been around a long time, they've got Linux environments that are they've been running for 10, 15, 20 years, longer in some cases. The guys supporting those platforms have long since moved on. We've done investigations with customers where they have a nicotine yellow server in the corner, and they're like, "Don't touch that. That's our main business platform. We're not quite sure how it works. And the password hasn't been changed. It's not been patched in years." These are some pretty big companies that have these systems.
Yeah, so what kind of got you interested in the IR side of things?
In what regard?
It just kind of what kind of got you to pivot to that area more from like the offensive security side?
I kind of ended up doing both simultaneously. When I first started this, the red teaming wasn't very popular. The pen testing wasn't very popular. A lot of what was out there was just run an SS scan, generate a report, move on. Obviously, things have moved on massively since then. But I started dealing with APTs a lot. I started dealing with some pretty sort of respectable threat actors in terms of their TTPs and activities, and it was fun. You were going up against a real adversary who had a real aim, be it financially motivated, be it politically motivated. These were real people. We were crossing paths. It was, kind of like playing chess. Real consequences.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting what you mentioned. Politically motivated. It seems like one of the motivators behind threat actors now has really kind of drastically changed, I think, in my opinion. And I'd like to hear yours. There seems to be a lot more politically motivated and hacktivism out there because, there's a lot of stuff around, climate, that there's groups that could be trying to protect the environment. There's a lot of different political and, political stuff, as well as climate motivated things that might motivate threat actors. So what are kind of your thoughts on some of the evolution of some of the threat actors?
Yeah, I mean, it was always just financially motivated or just, politically motivated in the sense, it was a nation state threat actor after secrets. But yeah, we are seeing people who are doing this for that net effect, be it Iran, be it whoever else. It's a form of protest. And Anonymous became quite popular in that regard, in a something for people to get behind, a cause, and people pick their cause and whatever motivates them. It's no one person, it's no one target demographic. It's just whoever feels that way inclined and has sufficient motivation to do it. And that's the difficult thing, is you can't put these people in a box and profile them from all walks of life, from all countries. You can't guess.
Yeah, one of the interesting things too, just beyond just the motivation part, just now the monetization of these attacks, because you remember back when we were talking about, earlier how things have evolved and stuff. But one of the things you have to look at too is, remember one time there was really kind of hard for threat actors to monetize the attacks. So it was like, trying to sell data. And now with ransomware, I mean, they can get paid if the company is willing to pay the ransom. So kind of what's some of your insights on the way that's evolved with threat actors finding ways to monetize attacks?
I mean, we certainly saw with ransomware a big uptake in people because this, it became a career, to do it on the unlawful side. So, you've got the big ransomware groups who are making big money out of this. Wasn't too long ago, you could actually track their Bitcoin wallets and see how much money they had in there. And, these were tens of millions of dollars, and they are running as businesses. The big software group, the big groups, they have service desks, they have help desks, they have, these are salaried individuals. But you've also got the ransomware as a service kind of, where you've got individuals who are going around finding these exploits. They're coming in, they're compromising companies, they're doing the enumeration, they're understanding the value of the endpoints they have, and they're then selling those endpoints on to other actors and other groups. And so, even the privateers, if you like, the individuals are still able to make money out of this, and the cryptocurrencies make it very, very easy for that money to change hands. Whereas, there was always a money trail of some description even a decade ago. There is no correlation now. It's between VPNs and cryptocurrency. There is no accountability and no tracking. So it's a lot easier for them.
Yeah, kind of hard to track, a lot more difficult to track than someone asking for a wire transfer or send me a check.
Exactly. Yeah. So the anonymity is there, and you can do this from anywhere in the world. And the sad reality is there are still many, many companies out there still vulnerable to Eternal Blue and so on and so forth. You've only got to go and Showdown occasionally and look at some of the older exploits that are still internet facing. Yes, some of them are honeypots, but some of them aren't.
So based on your offensive security background, what kind of tips can you give people to better protect their environments?
If everybody patched and enabled MFA, there wouldn't be as many jobs in cyber. But the sad reality of it is we've been saying that as practitioners for as long as I can remember. But the people seem to focus on buying the newest, shiniest tool and plugging that into their stack rather than doing the boring day to day of just patch on a weekly, fortnightly, monthly basis, whatever your customer base can withstand. Enable MFA, enable single sign-on, and remove SSH keys. Don't share SSH keys. Don't enable NSH on the internet. That would make real offensive cybersecurity, the bad threat actors' lives much, much more difficult.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting you mentioned that, because just the basic hygiene, because a lot of attacks and stuff you see nowadays, people are using some kind of password dumps, and they're not changing their passwords, because one of the things that's a challenge about like these password dumps is you could take some password that was part of a breach, and it could be a complex password, But if a threat actor's got one of these databases with it, it could be a 20-character password. But if they got the password, then it's just as strong as like a 4-character password. So as you're kind of mentioning, those basic hygiene things get overlooked. And it's interesting how people kind of overcomplicate security. They think they gotta get the latest and greatest, as you kind of mentioning, you know, the shiny new toy to secure these environments, but they forget about the basic hygiene.
Absolutely. And you're once in and you have sufficient admin credentials, you're in, and many of those tools become null and void at that point. And it doesn't lend well to the marketing for defensive tools, but that's the sad reality of it. Is, you know, you can have all the best tools in the world, but if you've got an old internet facing Linux box with SSH enabled, no logging, you know, and no lockout on that account, it's only a matter, you know, it's only a matter of time before somebody brute forces that password. Where else is that SSH key used in that environment? How quickly can that threat actor pivot around that network, move laterally, and bring that customer down?
Yeah, it's also kind of excuse me. It's also interesting too to see at times that companies buy all this software, all these new products, they've got them in their environment, and either they don't have them deployed or deployed correctly. I mean, sometimes it's really worth them paying for the professional services to have someone come set up quickly, because I've been in organizations that had all this stuff and they weren't using it, or they didn't have it, the endpoints tuned properly, that all sorts of stuff was going on in the background. It wasn't being detected. I did a pen test for this company once, and we actually got on site because this is a full scope pen test. So we're taking more of a black box threat actor approach, and it got down to the last 8 hours of the pen test. So we sneak on site, get into a conference room, and we got such little time. I'm running Nessus scans, I'm running Responder and all this real noisy hacking tools. Gain access, I'm able to use Hashcat to crack some password hashes that I gained using Responder. I'm able to create a user account on this system, gain access to it, and then we weren't detected until like 12 hours after we left, and they had all the latest and greatest stuff in place. It just wasn't tuned to catch and, you know, detect and block any of this malicious activity that we had going on.
I've seen it multiple engagements where EDR is deployed but not doesn't have critical modules turned on, because either they create too much noise or they just weren't configured by the SE in question. Most EDR is pretty good if it's configured and, you know, everything's turned on and everything's tuned. But sometimes it's, you know, it's installed by a third party who just deploys it with the bare minimum. They don't want that customer to, you know, they don't want the fuss from that customer. So they will deploy it and move on to the next one. You know, they don't want the support cases of, you know, why are we getting these false positives, etc. Or worse still, it's deployed in alert mode and not in block. So, you know, there's a dashboard somewhere getting filled with alerts with you doing all of your offensive, but there's nobody actually looking at that dashboard because the security team, if they have one, is too strapped on time to actually spend time looking at it. They might do it on a Friday after lunch before clocking off, and that's when they see you. Ironically, that's when 90% of the IR jobs happen, is on a Friday afternoon.
And so this next question, I'm going to kind of put it out there for the audience to answer this question within the comments within YouTube or whatever platform that you're consuming this on, is for any of the blue teamers out there, are you trying to learn any of the red team side, the offensive security side, to become a better defender? And on that note, I'm going to ask Tim, what's your advice for blue teamers and defenders to be able to leverage offensive security to become better in their roles? What advice would you give them?
I don't think it's possible to be a high tier blue teamer without understanding red team methodology. It's one thing being able to use a UI for a platform and see bad things happening and respond to those alerts. But once you understand what it takes to get on, you know, to get a foothold in the environment, to understand how difficult it is to escalate privileges on a Windows box, how difficult it really is to, you know, to move laterally. You know, in a training environment where you can use any old exploit, you know, use Mimikatz, gain credentials, move laterally. That's not the real world. And once you understand the frustrations of a red team, or the frustrations of a pen test, and what you have to do, and then you understand where that attack is going to go next. So you understand your environment, and if they've enumerated, you know, are they going after the domain controller? Are they going after, you know, the file server? because they don't have sufficient credentials. Are they going to have to hop around user workstations until they get sufficient credentials? But understanding the actual methodology is essential, in my opinion, to understanding how to defend against it, especially in an active attack. When you're seeing part of the attack and you know what that attacker is going to have to do next to get where they need to be, that's how you mitigate it. And the only way you can mitigate it.
Yeah, one of the things you kind of touched on earlier, I wanted to kind of revisit is how like Linux and Unix and Mac OS type systems are becoming more of a risk. If you wouldn't mind getting into, your opinions on how to secure those endpoints and kind of reduce the risk on those commonly used systems.
I mean, the biggest thing with them is have some form of monitoring on them, have those logs going off somewhere to be analyzed and ingested into some form of EDR and monitoring that's actually going to give you something back on that. What we typically see is Linux isn't touched by providers because it's too hard and it's not where the money is. Once you've got root on a Linux box, that's your box to do as you will, whether you're a bad threat actor or an administrator. So I can delete the logs. There's nothing you can do about it, and you're not getting them back. So that's the difficult bit as a defender, because that attacker runs RM minus RF, it's gone. And actually finding that data on the box is very, very difficult. Even doing dead box forensics, is not going to get you a massive amount of data back like it would on a Windows environment. So if you've not secured it down, if you're not using individual SSH keys per user per device, and to limit access. So when they do have access to one box, they've not got access to all of your boxes. But most importantly, having something to alert you when they, catsc shadow file or, catsc password or all those things that they're going to do on that box. Reality is most threat actors don't have a massively high knowledge of Linux like they did with Windows. So what we tend to see when most threat actors, excluding top tier APT, is they tend to fumble about on Linux. They've tried one or two flavors, but all of a sudden you've got some custom Red Hat environment they've never seen before. So they're using the same sans cheat sheets that you're using to sort of fumble their way around and try and understand what the environment is, understand where those key credentials are. And understanding where those are and having those piped off somewhere is going to save you a lot of time and give you some evidence to actually hunt in.
Yeah, one of the things I think people underestimate too is, you've got Linux in these environments and you need to interact with your Windows environment. And sometimes they're setting up SMB shares, they're running Samba, they're, interacting and connecting with Active Directory. So it's easier to manage and easier to use within those Windows ecosystems. And I think sometimes people don't realize the risk of these systems and why they really need to be locked down better.
And that is an important point with, especially when sort of Active Directory on Linux, it's difficult to implement. And so when people do tend to implement it, it's kind of, I've got it working with the bare minimum configuration. I'm not going to touch it now. So when they do have access to that environment, and having access to that Linux environment gives them access to Active Directory, usually with a relatively privileged account, it is a very legitimate infection vector that you're probably not going to catch.
So I've got a lot of listeners that are trying to break into cybersecurity or fairly new. So what bit of advice would you give someone that's just starting out?
The best cybersecurity practitioners I know didn't start as cybersecurity practitioners. When I started, there wasn't a entry-level cybersecurity role, and to many respects, there isn't an entry-level role now. Even a low level or lower level SOC analyst, that's not an entry-level position. In my opinion, and understanding, doing IT jobs first, learning system administration, learning help desk, learning how to do those kind of jobs, I think are essential training to then further your career in cybersecurity. And what I tend to find is the analysts and the incident responders that have done those jobs fundamentally know how Active Directory works, and how the logging and how Windows logging works, and have those key fundamental skills or network security, understanding the OSI model and understanding how routing and switching works massively increases your employability and your cyber skill set. Because cyber is a big encompassing word, and how do I get into cyber? It's all cyber if you look at it from a certain angle.
Yeah, that's even if you look at from a system admin perspective, you're managing servers. There's some security involved in that. And kind of expanding upon that thought is I spent the first 6 years of my technology career as a sysadmin before I moved into security. And it was one of the best experiences I had that was relatable to pen testing. So once I became a pen tester, having the knowledge of Windows and Linux systems made me a lot better pen tester.
Exactly that, because you can kind of reverse engineer it and go front to back. Whereas if you've just got a job, your first job was a SOC analyst, then you understand how to respond to alerts. You don't necessarily have a deep understanding of what's happening underneath, which I think when somebody's done those other jobs as well, it makes you a far better defender or attacker.
Yeah, great advice. And for the listeners, put in the comments if you're working in IT or you plan to start out in IT before you move over to security. The good thing about any of this stuff, and one of the things I like about security compared to just standard IT, is if you're a Cisco administrator and you decide you want to be a database administrator, that's pretty much a retrain. You probably got to take a cut and pay. But if you're working in some area of cybersecurity, what knowledge you gain there, if you're not getting to start on pen testing and say you're working in audit, those skills are pretty transferable to being a pen tester. That mindset is going to help you. You may have to take a lateral, but you're still building upon that. So definitely, I like your thoughts on not underestimating the IT roles, because that's very important and can help skill you up to do those roles. Because one of the things you think about, if you're going to take a degree for cybersecurity, there should be some basic IT stuff in there on networking and operating systems to be able to understand that. Because if you don't understand the technology, it's hard to defend, and it's even more difficult to break into.
And also, for both offensive and defensive, you have to love it. It has to be something that drives you. I've spoken to people and I want to get into cybersecurity. Why? Because the pay's good. You're not going to make it. Yes, the pay can be good at the higher levels. It's pretty good across the board. But unless you love it, unless you live it, then there are lots of other people out there who do. It is part of what makes them tick. When I interview people, one of the questions I always ask is, I shouldn't say because now people know, what's the geekiest thing you've done outside of work? Because that tells me a lot about somebody. I want those people that've got 10 Raspberry Pis piled up behind them, that does their home automation, that is taking things apart to understand how things work. Because without that mindset, in my opinion, it's that is essential for being a good pen tester or being a good defender.
So I appreciate you joining me today. It's interesting to learn more about you. I look forward to seeing you at Black Hat. Before we close it out, could you share how people can find you?
Yeah, so obviously I'm on LinkedIn, Tim Shipp. But if anyone wants to reach out, if anyone needs advice getting into the industry, I'm always happy to help people out. I was helped out very early on in my career. I didn't have a degree. I had managers who took a chance on me and people who took a chance on me, employing me, and I always look to give the same back to other people. People want to reach out to me on LinkedIn, more than happy to discuss.
Thanks everyone for joining today, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you enjoy the podcast, please like, share, and subscribe depending on the platform you're on. I'd like to give a shout out and a big thank you to our sponsor, ThreatLocker. You can visit ThreatLocker at threatlocker.com/simply offensive. Until next time.